Welcome everyone. I'm going to share my screen. Let me just pull up my Chrome window here. Welcome to Managing Student Group Projects Online. We have a website for this session. It's just right here. It's bit.ly/student group projects. So Jason or Holly, if you can paste that into the chat box, that would be great. And this is going to include all the resources that we talk about today, but it will also remain online afterwards too. So if you ever need to come back to it, it will be there. And we'll likely add to it too. The more stuff that we learn, we can add in here. And feel free to share it with anybody as well. So on this page, or on this site, on the second tab here is we'd like to collect your tips for managing student group projects online. We know that you all probably have at least one really good tip of what works for you and your students. So we would like to collect them onto this Padlet and just sort of grow this Padlet to include a bunch of tips. So to add a posting onto this Padlet, you can just visit it at this direct link here, or you can add it just straight here by clicking on the plus symbol, and that will open up a post and you can just add in a tip, even if it's just one line. If it's something that works amazing for you, you know, some of the things that Flower was talking about today, like managing time zones, and do you have team contracts, and do you assign roles, things like that, that work really well for you and your students. We would love it if you would share it under your tips. But before we start talking about students, we actually want to talk about us for a second. So we want to do a little bit of meta reflection and think about how we actually collaborate online as faculty. So thinking about how we collaborate. So for this presentation, you know, we assembled our group, reaching out to folks that we knew knew stuff about this content. We reached out to Irina. She gave us some input on things that we should talk about. We built an outline for the presentation. We set regular meetings. We agreed on the tech that we were going to use. So we agreed that we were going to use Google Slides and Sites and Microsoft Teams and Miro. Because we all had access to them, we all were comfortable with them. And then we worked on our assigned tasks individually while still chatting regularly in teams. So we were still a team, but we were working individually. And then, of course, we met for a final dress rehearsal. So I think students kind of experience this type of thing too. Another experience too is the Learning Portal. So I was the project manager for the Learning Portal for 3 or 4 years. And this was trying to get together folks from 18 colleges to work together to build this academic support site. And it was all online because we're all spread out through the province. It was way before COVID. And again, we did the same similar things that students might do in their projects. We set roles, we designed, or, you know, the project manager, the design lead, the subject matter experts. We agreed to timelines, things that worked for our schedules. We set regular meetings, and we had ongoing communication throughout the process too. Another one too is our Seneca faculty Facebook group. Some of you might be in this group already. If you're not, you can always search for this on Facebook and join. And this is sort of informal online collaboration. It's an informal online group. And we designate admin roles. So 4 or 5 of us are administrators and we take care of managing the group. We chose a platform that suits our group. So we chose Facebook because we were all there anyway. There's ongoing communication and troubleshooting and sharing and reflection and all that sort of thing that happens there. And then our admins, they ensure that the membership is only faculty. So this is trying to encourage psychological safety within a group. And Jason's going to talk a bit more about psychological safety. So as faculty members and, you know, people that are working in education, we might share similar experiences with students working in groups. So thinking about our students and the things that we do that are similar, but we are a little bit different. So sometimes when we're working in these online groups, we often already know each other. So I've known Jason for a long time. I've known Holly for a long time. I've worked with them already on things. And we already have those social bonds and we have sort of a built-in trust. I know this is not true for every group. We've all been in groups that we did not have this, but you know, it often is true. And we often have prior experience with teamwork and project management and online collaborations. So I've worked at Seneca for over 20 years now, and I can't even think of how many projects I've been part of, mostly online. And our motivation can be high due to our professional accountability. Student motivation might be really high too because they want to make sure that they're doing their best, but they might not have that same sort of professional accountability built in. Of course, faculty don't always have it built in either, but it's something that we hope that we already sort of have baked in to what we're doing. So let's think about ourselves when we're thinking about our students and try to have that empathy towards them about, oh yeah, I was part of a project, a group project once that was really terrible that once too. Now, I just wanted to share with you the Miro board that we had built. And this is something that is, Jason has access to the paid version, but you can get access to a free version as well. And having these sort of online collaboration tools are really great. Google Sites is another, Google Slides is another, these online tools for collaboration. And we have some links to technology to support online groups that we'll just touch on later on. But right now, we want to get into the actual meat of the session, and that is Jason and Holly sharing their extensive experience with you with managing online student groups. So under examples, this is where you're going to find all the resources that Jason and Holly will be talking about. So you've got their slides and some of the media that they talk about in their presentation. So if you need to come back to it, then it's all going to be on this page. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And Jason, you can take over.
My screen. And okay, I want to talk about remote group dynamics.
So have you got your microphone close to your mouth? Sorry, you seem really quiet.
Oh, okay. How about now? All
Perfect.
Right. Yeah, got to get this new podcasting mic set. Perfect. So we're going to talk about remote group dynamics. And the key to remote group dynamics, I think, are three elements. So the first one is burstiness. The second one is task bubbles. And the third one is psychological safety. And I'm going to go through each one individually. So burstiness. Burstiness is about collaborating synchronously. So I'm going
like a really crowded family dinner. Everyone is jumping into the conversation.
Yeah. Sorry, I want to set up burstiness for a bit, the last little bit. So kind of what we had in the cold open, that was a little bit of burstiness. That was us kind of riffing off each other and stuff. This, what you're going to hear is a little clip from Adam Grant, who got to go into the Daily Show writer's room and listen to or see burstiness in action. And this was back when the Roy Moore scandal was on.
Starting to feel like a really crowded family dinner. Everyone is jumping into the conversation.
Yeah, I wonder if like his favorite booth has like his name carved into it, like Roy Moore's seat. Yeah, I'd never got pancakes and waffles there, and the restaurant's like, that's what we call the Roy Moore special.
His picture's on the wall for the pancake challenge.
The first thing I notice is that the room is full of creative bursts. Believe it or not, there's a name for that in the psychology of creativity. It's called burstiness. Burstiness is like the best moments in improv jazz. Someone plays a note, someone else jumps in with a harmony, and pretty soon you have a collective sound that no one planned. Most groups never get to that point, but you know burstiness when you see it.
And so that was what we were trying to show you guys that was what we're trying to show you guys in the cold open. And it's really important for our students to get that level of burstiness, to be comfortable, to be able to riff off each other, and in order to collaborate and get something done. So in order to get them to do burstiness, one thing I like to do is encourage a culture of helpfulness. So I tell them that they should do some status meetings. They should do a status meeting. And in the status meeting, they should ask, what was the progress from last week? Are you worried about anything? Do you need help with anything? So we're setting a culture of helpfulness amongst the group, and then that'll help lead to burstiness. One thing about burstiness I should add, it doesn't mean that it's not like the typical brainstorming, no bad ideas, no idea is a bad idea. It means we're so comfortable, we're there talking with each other that we're so comfortable critiquing. The next bit is task bubbles. And for that, I'm going to get off PowerPoint and do a little demonstration. So it's one thing that, yes, we all have to meet and find time, but we also have to go into our little bubbles and start working on our own. It also helps to work on our own and then come back and collaborate. And so, you know, you're going to divide the work up and conquer, and then we'll come back and collaborate. So what we have, oh yeah, that's us collaborating. I'm going to show you one of my teams here, and yeah, we do ads, so that's why that's there. Or we talk about ads. This is the marketing course. But I want to show you this team. So here's a team that's always talking with each other, that's sharing files, that's even sharing meetings and status meetings that they're doing. And they're all doing this inside Microsoft Teams. And so they can have these little bursts of so they go off and they share their work, and they're always working on the same thing. And then they're also attached to Trello, and Trello is their project management tool. And here you can have, there's big items, they have lists of items they have to do. So here's their group meeting agendas. They've got to create a slide deck. They're creating an app. And then there's little cards for every task that has to be done. And then inside each card, you can link to different things. In these cases, they link to, they can comment on what's been done, and they can assign it to people. And that's really important. I'm actually going to go off that browser for a sec and go into the big one so you can see it, because Zoom keeps pushing it out. So they've even color coded it. So the green means in progress or reference, red means to do, blue means done. They've told me this. And then, so this is like the card view where they have the big things, the things they have to do, and the little things they have to do in there. And then you have calendar view where they can see where everything's due. So, and these are the things they've already cut out. So here's a group that's that knows how to, you know, that's very bursty when they need to be, but more importantly, they have a really strong, you know, they've got the strong task bubbles that they do when they're, you know, when they're off on their own working. And then the third thing is that burstiness and task bubbles, these only work when there's psychological safety. And psychological safety, it's a concept started by Dr. Amy Edmondson at Harvard and got popularized by Adam Grant with his big podcast at Wharton. But it's this belief that no one will be punished or humiliated by speaking up with ideas, questions, or concerns or mistakes. And that is, it's the freedom to be vulnerable in a group setting, and the freedom to speak, you know, to be able to speak their mind, but also freedom to criticize. And so, yeah, you know, part of that, you can do it through group contracts, but if it's a professor imposed group contract, I don't think it's going to be as good as if if the group themselves make up the group project themselves. And here Strategizer's got a great work template for how groups can come up with their group contract with a simple of, okay, what's in, what are the behaviors we want, and what's out, what are the behaviors we definitely never want to have. And it's just a nice group exercise that you have them do. I also give them this really cool instructional video on good group dynamics. I'm not going to play all of it. I'm just going to play the interesting part when she goes into what's a good group and what's a bad group.
A good team is like the Avengers before the Winter Soldier. It's a small group of people who motivate each other and have complementary skills. Everyone is on the same page, pulls their own weight, and has individual goals that line up with the bigger picture. And they hold each other accountable, so no one goes too rogue. A bad team is like the Avengers during Civil War. The timetable is all over the place. People are hiding things from each other and have personal goals that don't match the group's. Everyone's practically doing their own thing without much accountability, and they're not contributing equally. Seriously, Thor, where were you? The first...
Yeah, seriously, Thor. So the point that, you know, I show them this, I have them all watch this video before they start their group projects, the whole 10-minute version. So just so they get a feeling of what makes a good group. And then I want to introduce psychological safety by saying, tell us the worst piece of, like modeling it in class. So I start class actually by having every student introduce themselves. And I say, I ask them to tell me the worst piece of advice you've ever gotten, or tell us an embarrassing story from your recent past. And it's because it's research. Harvard has found that actually for better brainstorming, it's better if you show something embarrassing. It brings vulnerability into the table, and then it helps bond people into something that was into a cohesive group, so we can have psychological safety. And speaking of psychological safety, the three of us are pretty safe. So I think it's safe to say, Holly, take it away.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you. So again, if you have questions, guys, feel free to share them in the chat. I'm just going to now also share my screen as well. Fingers crossed, no tech fails. Can everyone see that? Are we having some success so far? Fabulous. Okay, so this is going to sound a little cheesy, I know, but it is very important to always be mindful. Simple key message: teamwork makes the dream work. And I'm going to explore group dynamics from the lens of internal communications and how to really create that, expanding on Jason's point of psychological safety. How do we create a dynamic where people feel informed and empowered, but that they're also working from a place of strength, and we're focusing on those strengths? And that's a really important key message that I always share with my students as well. Because often, I'm sure you can relate, I find that when I start to form groups or talk about group dynamics, it's really like asking somebody, well, how long is a piece of string? You know, what's the key to success, or what's the one right way? There has to be a formula. But I'm sure, again, we all have seen this both in our classrooms, but also experienced this professionally ourselves. There's no one right way. It actually is something that needs to be addressed each time where we're working with new individuals and we're seeing those new personalities, just like Jason has mentioned, and we're trying to establish, you know, how do we work, who works well, and why do they work that way? And I really like Keith and Bryant's perspective. And again, this is an internal communications reference. Just read it aloud. People strategically communicate to obtain information they need to be comfortable when faced with conditions of social relations in the world around them. And, you know, putting ourselves in our students' shoes and thinking about, especially in a virtual environment, this is exacerbated. It can be very problematic because there's no identity. Earlier today, we did a panel with the students talking about online assessments, and that was a common theme. If there's no, like, we're having our cameras are on, you're seeing me, you saw Jason and I try to banter back and forth and create a bit of an entertaining vibe. Hope it worked. But you know, that is a foundation for success. It's thinking about who's involved. And I like to describe it as, you know, it's the personalities and it's the practicalities. That's what we're really giving thoughtful consideration to. So I'm just going to share a summary right now, and then we're going to explore a few of these points in a little more detail. But thinking about, so how do we make those introductions with our students? It's one thing to form teams, but to Jason's point of burstiness, I mean, how do we actually create that connection where people feel safe to contribute their ideas? And then from that, who is on the team? So literally creating those commitments to each other, because there could be, to my next point, conflicting commitments. You know, we're always focused on the task at hand, but especially in a virtual environment, we also need to be mindful of empowering our students to understand that there are going to be conflicting commitments, you know, especially if people have children at home, or I have a puppy right now who's scratching outside my door, for example, who wants in. I mean, these things are going to happen either in a meeting, or it's going to happen that somebody has to miss a meeting, for example. And suddenly that can be very catastrophic and destructive to that group dynamic, if not strategically communicated. We've talked often a lot about also the logistics of creating that space for those meetings. So again, thinking about, when we talk about who is involved, literally, where are they in the world? And it could be, are they joining us from Vancouver, or are they joining us from China, East Coast, West Coast? There's so many variables to consider. So getting ahead of this conversation and starting to actually proactively help our students understand the expectations of all the individuals involved. And we're going to also talk about then, how do we manage those deadlines? I'm very pleased to share, you know, working with Jason and working with Jennifer on this project, it was effortless. We were all on the same page. We didn't really have to get into very specific details. Everyone was very, very proactive, very accountable. But in reality, that's usually not what happens because of different working styles. So again, I'll share with you a few tips and tricks. And my presentation is a little more practical today, but it's thinking about, okay, how do we, again, get ahead of these issues, an issues management perspective, if you will, and establish through solid internal communications, the expectations of everyone involved on the team. so that deadline management and different working styles becomes more organic. It becomes more fluid. With that, step one, and again, if you indulge me sharing another internal communications theory, uncertainty reduction theory, focusing on the fact that we are looking at those new group members from a place of, uh-oh, is really what it comes down to. It's that first impression. I chose this image specifically. It's kind of like the, comparing it to aliens who are joining a team, and it's like, how do we, get to know each other, and hello and greets, and create that connection, because all the individuals you're working with are foreign, because you don't know what they're doing. You don't know how they want to work. And unless we actually create a connection with the team members, there's never going to be that safety that Jason talked about, right? They're always just going to be different individuals who are working on different projects in different ways, and we're losing that cohesion, which really is the key to success, to successfully create a dynamic that is productive. That's where icebreakers come into play. So as Jason mentioned, we've demonstrated that. We tried to show you that vibe. But at the same time, let's be real. I'm sure some of you were watching us do that, and there was some eye rolls, like, really? I'm using my Monday afternoon to watch these people be all silly. How is this productive? And I'm sure equally you can relate. I know I have in a professional context. I say my past life before being an academic, you'd have team building days, and all you thought was, but why do I have to participate? I have other things that you need me to do. So when we're talking to our students and we're making those introductions, it's really important to also explain to them your rationale as to how, in participating with an icebreaker activity or investing in those introductions, you're going to be more successful as a team. So thinking about from the student's motivation and explaining that why factor to help them want to make those introductions. So it's not just a Blackboard group formed or an email that says, welcome to your team, but how do we then expand that to create a relationship that starts to form trust, so that when, to Jason's point, there are challenges or people want to have a voice or brainstorm, they feel confident and comfortable because now they know who they're working with. Now, in a virtual environment, it even becomes more complex, doesn't it? I'm sure we can all relate. Too many moving parts are coming at us all day. And now even our working hours and our working styles might shift. So in other words, as this image shares, the more people involved, there's more value, but it needs to be organized. And how we can accomplish that is through discussing our internal comms challenges and then those channels that are going to make us more effective. We have many at our click of a finger, if you will. MS Teams, for example, is an excellent resource for us because, as Jason has demonstrated, we can start to then collate those ideas. But I'd like to take it one step further. You're now also starting to manage other variables that we've talked about, things like time zone difference or competing or conflicting commitments. So now we're starting to inform our students about ways to manage those challenges as they arise. So in other words, it's not just satisfactory to say, I'm going to miss a meeting, because I'm sure you've all experienced this. Students get very frustrated. You're not pulling your weight. You're not helping me. This person isn't contributing enough to this project. But if we think about and explore the other ways that that person can contribute in their absence of a synchronous session, we're inviting everyone's voice into the conversation, and we're proactively managing the conflicts that may arise from those differing styles or these differing commitments. So what does this look like? Why are we really talking about group dynamics? Knowledge is power. What do I mean by that? Well, let's use a little example. If I were to tell you, please pack a box, is that enough information? So just to say, you know what, go do that, get it done. Now, I'll liken this to even something like our assignment or assessment briefs that we're posting to Blackboard. It's like, here you go do this thing. But without actually providing context and insight and inviting that two-way dialogue, we're restricting the ability for all the members of that conversation to be productive. So in other words, what we're looking to achieve is something that looks more like this. It's not just go pack a box. It's not just get in this group, go complete this assessment, job done. It's providing the tools and steps and resources and clarity to help manage the expectation and start to motivate those individuals to engage and ultimately to increase our team's productivity. So explaining this chart or this image, pardon me, instead of just here's a box, go do something with it. It's they're labeled, they're taped, they're organized. Have we talked about time for task completion? So for example, how long will it really take you to pack a box? And I'm sure some of you can think about this in the times in your life you've moved. Some people are amazing and other people it takes them 20 minutes to pack one box, which can be frustrating. Now, if we talk about those expectations before task completion, we now can start to come to a compromise and identify the different working styles. Volunteers, in other words, do you think that you can actually successfully complete this project or task yourself? Sometimes in group dynamics, students often will start to arbitrarily assign roles and assign tasks. And we've all seen that where an assessment is delivered to us and you can tell it's completely different font styles and there's just been inserting a group in a Google Doc to complete the project. But did they actually collaborate and come together and talk about the division of work? And again, it's working from a place of strength. So if there's a graphic element, for example, and you want to make a logo for the assessment with the submission, well, is somebody on your team really great with that? And having that conversation, or thinking about, I have a dollar sign here, but thinking about resources and what else that you might need. So that the planning phase as well really comes down to, it all comes down to communications, thinking about this ahead, adding clarity. So creating those two-way channels of communications to answer questions or ask questions. Also just creating, to Jason's point again, that safe space for somebody to put their hand up and say, you know what, I'm actually not really confident in proceeding with that. Can I have some support? Ultimately, this will result in an increased efficiency and productivity. Now, interestingly, and this is a great example of group dynamics, Jason and I kind of have differing perspectives from an academic perspective. You know, he just shared the method in which students can form their own group contract. And I 100% agree with you. Developing a group contract is so valuable because this is motivating those hard conversations. But I would actually encourage, and this is from my professional experience, I've tried to have students create groups or just creative contracts, but sometimes they either come back with, again, it's the clarity. Well, miss, what do you need from me? What do you expect? Because it's new. Or from there, sometimes they also haven't thought about a piece to include simply because they lack the experience in creating a contract of this nature. So it's on our website as well. This is just the beginning, a screenshot of an example of group contract, but I want to be very clear and also reiterate that I support Jason's method. I always tell my students that this is just a starting point. Going back to the beginning of my talk with you today, every group is unique and different. So they can expand this with as much detail as they wish. They can assign roles to help organize their team meetings. Or again, I like to do things like encourage them to assign a team leader, not because that person's going to be in charge or control or has to do all of the work, but teaching them how to then apply this communication style in a professional context. So instead of every team member emailing me with questions, teaching them that professional skill. One person can communicate with the team, one person can communicate with the professor, CCing the team members, starting to help create those channels where everyone's informed and everyone has an understanding of what's happening. And if you notice, I just wanted to draw to your attention as well, I do highlight to Jason's point again, forgive me, Jason, for being so repetitive, but you've got a lot of great stuff in your presentation. It also really comes down to looking at things like committing to that once a week meeting or twice a week meeting and helping the students with that time management piece to organize themselves so that group can regularly meet. And again, this is really important if we're looking at this from a perspective of a virtual classroom. Specifying the platform in which they wish to communicate. Some students will be working remotely from areas that either they're going to have issues, for example, with the internet. I just had that the other week. A group, very respectfully, I might add, wrote me a complaint though, saying that this person didn't contribute, they didn't participate. But once we actually got everyone back together, including the person that was being accused that was not involved in that original email chain, it turns out it's because their internet dropped out. So then how was she ever supposed to tell them she was going to miss the meeting? I've also experienced those challenges where sometimes they choose a platform which a student then later, once those challenges arrive or conflicts, admits that they don't have access to regular data. So talking in a WhatsApp group isn't going to necessarily be as effective for them as everyone in the group would assume. Or I've had situations where some students spoke on WeChat and other students spoke on WhatsApp. You know, and again, it's always coming back to how do we get everyone to agree to the times, the place, the methods, the manner in which they're going to communicate, to organize themselves. And starting to discuss also, very importantly, in a group contract, or if you want, you can take it one step further and write a whole policy like we do professionally of an internal comms policy. But talking with things like the students' expectations and guidelines. So for example, presence does not mean participation. In other words, logging in to the meeting is not sufficient. And it's amazing how if you actually will proactively pose this question to your students, this now is an opportunity for other individuals involved in that group to self-reflect. In other words, they can think about what's my working style? And this is where introducing many different manners and methods of channels of communication is really important. Because what can happen is that those maybe more introverted students who need time to reflect and gather their thoughts can share their ideas, say in MS Teams, or even just ask for that space to think about it after the fact so that they're participating in a different way. But I'm sure you've seen it as well. In a virtual environment, I find that some students express frustration when a colleague logs in and then ends scene, right? There's no delivery, there's no contributions. But we need to encourage our students when we're forming these groups to think about it from a different lens and a different perspective, that maybe there's a reason why that person isn't contributing. Maybe it's because that environment that they're working in that day is problematic and that they actually can't really turn on their microphone because their roommates are blaring a video game or who knows, right? So again, always returning back to that dialogue, if you will, to motivate that engagement between members. So sharing a brief summary here for your thoughts moving forward, but really it's to motivate the accountability and the responsibility. But the key element that I'd like to highlight, it's the transparency. Because that's where, again, in my professional practice, what I've seen often, both as a professional myself, but also working as a professor helping teach students how to work in groups, it's that transparency piece. When it's missing, that's where those assumptions start to build up. And it's kind of like a volcano, and it becomes one after another after another. And without having dialogue and explaining, you know, why I can't participate or why I had to miss a meeting, or I am comfortable in doing this, or I'm not comfortable in doing that element of the group project, without encouraging transparency and honesty, the vulnerability, that psychological safety Jason referred to, we're not going to be able to create a productive group dynamic, regardless of how transparent we are with respect to expectations or being solution oriented in that conversation. You know, it could be something as simple as motivating the students to talk about their working styles. You know, who likes to work last minute? And I always like to ask my students this, poll them, who's like a night owl who works at midnight? And, you know, you'll see like, let's say, I don't know, 2/3 of the class, me. And then you see the other group is like, I'm an 8 p.m. kid, right? I need to go to bed early. Well, even that transparency in conversation, acknowledging your working styles, again, it's going to let you get ahead of those issues. And I certainly have seen it. Students become frustrated with each other because they think someone is ignoring their message at 11 o'clock at night. You know, they see that little check on their screen and they're like, but you read the message. And meanwhile, what they haven't talked about is that student also maybe works a night shift, or maybe that student you know, is up with their children. So just because they're reading the message isn't that they're ignoring them. It may be there's another conflicting commitment or responsibility that they had to fulfill in that time. So the transparent dialogue well in advance will help get ahead of these issues, and it'll help establish a more confident working relationship between all members involved. So sorry, just have a little tech freeze here. There we go. Last few tips I'd like to share. Really important, defining your role as a professor when you're establishing these group dynamics so that they understand you're not judge and jury. And I'm sure you've seen this as well. I had recently a group who was frustrated with a team member because of the presence, not participation variable. And they demanded that her grade would be reduced without any evidence, without any conversation. They just had arbitrarily decided that they should tell me this is what should happen. And then I should be the one to then impose that. But again, it's not productive, right? It's about encouraging the students, bringing them back together, explaining that as they're learning how to develop this professional skill, you're there to help them. But it's not a place of judgment, right? It's or to Jason's point, it's not a place of humiliation, that we need to have those open conversations. Engagement is not happiness. So I want to be really clear. The focus of my presentation to you today is by no means about feel-good vibes. It's not about just making sure that everyone wraps up a meeting is like, that felt amazing. I did well today. That is not what we're trying to accomplish. What we are trying to accomplish is productivity, right? So that we're thinking about shared commitment to the goals, to successful task completion. So in other words, what does this look like? It's trying to transform that group dynamic through proactive internal communications, from involving students that feel like they have to work, but now they actually want to work. And that's really important as well. So just to conclude, and please indulge me, I know I broke a few of the standard design rules, but this is to help encourage sort of independent learning and reflection for you after our presentation, since our time is limited today. But a few bullet points I'd like to sort of conclude our presentation. One key, first point, please also explain that why factor with respect to the formation of groups. I'm sure you've also experienced over the years when students are in second, third, fourth semester, they start to get to know people, they want to choose their groups. So we need to explain to the students about the methodology of how those groups came to be. And I always like to compare it to the workplace. You know, I didn't get to choose to work with Jen, for example. We work in the same department. I'm very happy that I enjoy working with Jen. Thank goodness. But, you know, that's not the reality. And so when we have, again, if we're having those transparent conversations with our students, once the journey of the group work begins, what we're doing is we're actually managing the expectations from them as well, right? They're starting to understand that professional best practice, that they're developing a persona. So when there are those conflicts and challenges, and we are ended up saying to them, you know, I'm not asking you to be best friends, I'm just asking you to be solution oriented and productive. You know, they understand that there wasn't a bias in this formation, that this is what it's like to work in the real world. Also, a couple other tips for us as faculty, making sure to post that list of groups to ensure accountability by the students themselves. So thinking about, and I'm sure you've experienced again, sorry for always referencing that, but when a student comes to you in like week 8 and you get the email that says, but miss, what group am I in? And you're like, okay, but there was an email, there was an MS Teams, there was this, there was that. So always relating that call to action, because if we're thinking about it from the lens of our students, it can be challenging for them because they're in this virtual environment and they're trying to navigate all of their different courses, all of the multiple groups. This is a learned skill. So the more proactive internal communication that we can provide the students will also empower them to then become more independent as they move forward with their group deliverables. And then just to highlight again, 2 other key points I'd like to share, making sure that we also have conversations about access to technology and talking to our students about when working in that group, what does that look like? And if there are concerns, if there are restrictions, patience, flexibility, understanding, and also again, allowing students to come to be proactive, if you will, and to come to you privately with any issues. For example, we can't necessarily assume that every student joining your class has a laptop or has a phone. Like, it's not necessarily a given. Some of them might be working in a family environment where everyone's having to share 1 or 2 laptops, and it could be multiple individuals. So looking at this from a lens of empathy and practicality, so that if they need support to be successful in this group dynamic, that's where we can then help provide that support. And then last but not least, check-ins, stay in touch. So when we're planning our addendum in our weekly schedule, I also would like to suggest the investment of time on our end, where we're scheduling, just like we would in a professional capacity, those meetings, those check-ins, where the students can then come to you and you're saying, how are things going? And we're looking at all the documents we've taught them how to create, whether it's the group contract, or if it's even a management, like a deadline work back schedule. And we're looking to see where they're at, where they're on track, where they're running into some challenges. So creating space for us to be available for the group as a whole as part of the course content, and not necessarily just as something that they have to find space for to come to meet with you. Again, it's helping that time management piece. So with that, that concludes my, I guess, top 10 tips if we're trying to be all SNL. Is that what we're trying to do, Jason?
We're trying to do something entertaining.
We're trying to do something, but I will stop sharing my screen and I will pass it back over.
Thank you.
There's a question in the chat from Lori C, a very good question. Would you ever assign groups based on the night workers versus morning last minuters versus get it done right? Good question.
I have an immediate response.
Go for it.
No, for one reason. It's a great idea, you know, if we're thinking about to get the work done in this space, but it's going to make it easier for them. But at the same time, that's not real life. And we're also trying to help them develop that professional persona to be solution oriented, so that when you're working with a night owl and somebody who's an early riser, how do you come to that happy medium? I think that's an important takeaway to encourage our students to explore. What do you think, Jason?
I agree. I was, you know, it might sound nice on the surface to do it, but in general, sometimes you don't get to choose who you're working. I think it's actually part of a skill to be able to work with someone who has a different work style as you. And then thirdly, it's so much easier, you know, to use the random assigned thing in Blackboard to just have that group.
Yeah.
And you're just going to create a lot of extra work for yourself.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point too.
Sometimes it's good to pair up different types of working styles because they complement each other. I know that happened to me when I was doing my master's. I got paired up with somebody who, you know, left everything last minute, and I'm not like that. I'm type A. I need to get everything done early, and he loved it because I pushed and pushed and pushed, and he needed that to make it happen. So yeah, sometimes it works out well.
Yeah, we got another one, a good one in the chat from Hirsch Foreman. What are your thoughts on peer evaluations?
Do you go ahead, Jason?
So you have to take them with a grain of salt, because I've had situations where 3 people ganged up on one, and then when I really opened the situation, it turned out the one was more right than the other was doing stuff that the other 3 shouldn't have been doing, and vice versa. Yeah. So yeah, they're good to have. They're good to have, but I would not make them the be all and end all. Especially if there's an issue, you're going to have to do a little investigation yourself.
I couldn't agree more. Jason, it goes back to internal communications. I always think that there needs to be an element of transparency introduced to help proactively mitigate some of those challenges with personalities. Like you said, if it becomes a couple against another, somebody shouldn't have to defend themselves, right? There should be very open conversations and measurements that are transparent. And so what I like to do sometimes is, if I do include like a reflection piece or a peer evaluation, I actually ask them to submit it as part of the deliverable so that everybody in that group gets to see what everyone else wrote. And that motivates, again, that dialogue, right? Because before they're submitting that assessment, those hard conversations might happen, right? So it doesn't even actually end up on our desk, which really is empowering them to be more mature and accountable about their concerns in times of conflict. Because unfortunately, human nature or not, people generally tend to more criticize than celebrate. And so also I would just leave that as another takeaway, is thinking about be mindful of how we structure, like leading with facilitated discussion questions, so that we're encouraging both the constructive criticisms, but also making them celebrate each other.
Yeah, we have another on the chat. I think Mark Altern was talking about the balance between top students and weaker students, and getting them in groups and stuff like that. How do we navigate that? It's and then actually, thank you, Scott, for weighing in too on the chat. But it's true. It really depends. So for example, this year I have semester-long projects. I I have to form the groups in week 1 and I don't know the students. So I basically did randomize.
Yeah.
And we'll see how it goes later. Oh,
someone has an opinion.
Yeah. It's got to stay
Yeah.
with the back.
Yeah. Well, and you know, Jason, you actually bring up an interesting point as well, just regarding, I'm mindful of unconscious bias and the assumptions that that could lead to that are unfair to students. I wrote this message a couple semesters ago, and I just titled it "What If," and I posted to Blackboard after I formulate the groups. And it basically says, like, what if this is your time to shine? And what if this is your chance to help somebody shine? And what about it? What if this is your chance? And it's like all about just these reflective pieces for them to think about, but really focusing on the fact that some people, there might be challenges. They might need your support. That's part of it. And I'm very hesitant. I really respect your point of it's hard if you have a bunch of, say, like Jen said, you know, like type A students all working in one person assigned group, but then we're also restricting. We're making assumptions about other students, and this could be their day. This could be their big win this semester. And so I'm hesitant if we don't know them and don't have any information to inform the group formation. It's not necessarily, I think, fair to those individuals to be labeled in that manner.
Yeah. The chat, there's more. Jovi Allison, how often do you meet with groups and where? Is it MS Teams? Yes. So yes, I encourage a lot of MS Teams meeting. And the reason is because you can do a lot of things asynchronously. So I, like many people my age, I have my phone in my pocket all the time and I have MS Teams on it. So what's great is I can do a lot of quick responses back to students. And I know they love the fact that, like, okay, you'll get a quick hit pretty, you know, they'll respond pretty fast if they go in Teams. If they go in email, it could get lost. And I tell them that. On Teams, it's less likely to get lost. So that's the first bit. And then secondly, there's already a context in Teams. So when there's communication in Teams, I already know, okay, you're in group this, and it's related to that, you know, it's related to this piece of work, which you can't do in an email. So, I mean, that's actually why MS Teams is really, well, okay, it's why, because they're trying to compete with Slack. But the reason it's there is because it puts communications in the context of a particular piece of work. And I have a lot of students who say, oh, we have a WhatsApp group, and that sometimes can work. But then I tell them, I'm like, here's the thing. When you go into the work world, they will not accept that. They will have either Teams or Slack or emails. And you're going to have to live with the communication tool that the organization has. Seneca has Teams.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% agree. And Stella brings up a really good point in the chat too, about having the students, like if we're having that check-in with them, they're demonstrating, now, are they on the same page, so that there's also midpoint check-ins moving towards an assessment. And to answer the question, that's really how I structure. Depending upon when the course deliverable is, I then will make sure to schedule a check-in with the students. Often I like to do it right after break week, for example, because usually that's where they've used that time. They're going to hustle and work through those deliverables, but then that's also when some of the conflicts arise or the questions. So if we do the check-in, I find the week after, if it's something that's due later in the semester, then that gives us time to get them back on track, to resolve those issues and help aid in their success for whatever deliverable. So it's not those frantic last minute night before emails that I know we've all seen.
Another question was about students requesting more consistent groups across various courses. So maybe having the same group for the whole program. What do you think about that?
So I'm in a program where we do that. Or in programs where we do, and I think that's fair. You know, I think that's fair, but I think it's going to be for a program to program decision, really. I think it works in our program because the advantage is that everyone's schedules are going to be very much aligned. The disadvantage is that they don't they don't get to know as many people as they could. You know, they don't get to work with as many people as they could. So it's got its pluses and minuses.
So it's interesting. In my program, our students are in cohorts. So it's first semester, second semester, grad cert. So they're always together. They want that, especially in second semester, because they get to know each other and they know who they like to work with and don't like. And that's the key. So I'm sorry, I seem to be like the other side of the conversation today. But
it all works because we're psychologically safe.
There you go. But I mean, my recommendation is to be mindful of that again, because if we're developing a professional skill, you don't get to choose who you work with. And so although that's practical and it makes their lives easier and it's safer for them here, it's not empowering them to develop the maturity to handle those situations. Even just something simple like being solution oriented with their schedules, because people are in different classes and have different schedules. They're going to have to find some time. But then that's also where I just would like to add, we can help support that, because we can also then plan space for them to have time during class or breakout sessions or things like that. So it's balancing the expectation of them to find time and then creating a little bit of time in our course content to help create space for them to start to build that trust in that dynamic.
There was a question sort of about how do you respond to the 1 or 2 students who are doing all the heavy lifting and are, you know, saying that the other team members aren't doing their load or sharing their load. How do you respond to those?
I think in a virtual environment, it's definitely more problematic. So I'm proactively mindful of that when I develop the assessment. So just to give you an example, I teach internal communications, obviously, hence my presentation. And one thing I like to do is I made an individual deliverable for an internal comms policy. Then we formed the groups, and then they had to take their ideas and create a draft model and a complete model. So now what they were able to do is through a Word document, they track changes. So that showed everyone's contributions. So if somebody, again, comes to you and they start to make those accusations, somebody's not doing the heavy lifting, for example, we now at least have a reference point. So I like to try to create platforms or include deliverables. I appreciate it might be a little more work for us, but then that way it mitigates some of those challenges and it motivates some of the individuals who might not have been as involved, because now you're expecting them to demonstrate their involvement in some way. So
yeah, I mean, that's where the platforms really come into play.
Yeah.
So the Trello boards hold everyone accountable. So I can literally view, I can see, okay, you were assigned this. I can see who was behind because so I always have, each group has to have a project manager, and the project manager owns the Trello board. So the project, you know, if they're keeping their Trello board up to date, then I can see, okay, well, there's, you know, you've shown evidence that it's right there. Also in MS Teams, if they're communicating in it, you get to see all of that, assuming you're part of that team. And I set myself as part of that team. Otherwise, in order to facilitate, you know, the asynchronous questions, Q&A. So right away, I can look, and to your point on documents, you can see, well, who's participating and who isn't. So now the evidence is a lot more there. And I mean, I think back to when we go back to in real life groups, I think you're still going to see these tools getting used now for collaboration, even though we're in the same room, because it just helps to vet. And yeah,
can I just add 2 points, just to quickly takeaways as well? Think about maybe adding a declaration form. It's amazing. I use this, actually, I got this idea from when I completed my master's. We had to just submit as part of the cover page a declaration that this is sort of a commitment to academic integrity and that this is my own original thought. Now, I'm not suggesting that your declaration relates directly to academic integrity, but it's amazing. Again, if you have the students all have to just sign one piece of paper, it's fascinating how it motivates these conversations, again, before the delivery and before the deadline, so that the students can come to you and say, you know what, miss, I don't want so-and-so's name on this paper. And you can have those conversations, as opposed to after the fact, where it becomes more problematic, because the key is you're not creating space for that student to explain why they're not contributing. There could be a genuine reason. And we need to have time before that deadline to sort out those issues. That's where we can, again, we're helpful, we're guidance, we're not judgment. Other little tip, just while I'm thinking of it, make sure you're using Seneca emails. I ran into an issue this semester. They can go in, and I mentioned it in my slides on the back end, and they can change it to their own private email addresses, which can become problematic if you're not using Blackboard, for example, to message. So if you're wondering why students are emailing you through a Gmail account, that's probably why. So explaining your expectations. So we're using, like Jason said, Teams, only your Seneca accounts, and we're being very professional in that communication.
So I'll just say that I know we're almost at time, and I know there's other college meetings going on right after this. So if you have to leave, thanks so much for coming. But we do have a couple of other questions that have showed up in the chat box. And just know that the website, it has a bunch of technical tips too there for Blackboard groups, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, breakout groups, and things like that. So check out the website for those technical tips. But Janice was asking, when inputting Teams and MS Teams, can we easily access their email addresses?
Yes. So as soon as you start typing in their username, it looks for a student and pops it up, and there it is. So that's the thing. I think because Seneca has the education version of MS Teams, so it's integrated into the student record system.
And that's actually why I wanted to mention too, being transparent to your students. I ran into an issue this semester where, because they changed it from the back end, it was to their Gmails and such, they said they weren't getting my messages. So what I ended up doing is now posting a message to Blackboard, day one, here's how I'm going to communicate with you. Because what ended up happening is I probably had 6 students in that one class saying, but I can't get in yet, miss. So now again, you're figuring out ways well ahead to figure out how to communicate if you can't get them.
And along the same lines is, do you create separate groups, or, oh, sorry, it's popping around now. Do you create separate groups, or do you create separate private channels in in your main course page?
Yeah, I'll reshare my screen again. So because I'll show you two, I've got 2 different setups. So I got one class where I teach the only section in the class, or sorry, here's a class where I teach 2 sections of the class. And so you can see that there's one team for the entire program. And then we've got different channels for each student group based on the sections. And this lets me go in and out. I can see how group 1 and group 3 are bold. That means something's happened. Something new just happened there. And I can just see, I can take a look and, oh, okay, they had a meeting just recently, a group meeting, which is great. And it sees they have group meetings rather regularly. So that's good too. So, so that I find is the easiest way to do it. And then what I say is the general tab is for general conversations. So if you want to speak to the entire class, do it here in the general tab. I had them do a class discussion. That's why you're seeing a lot of stuff now. They have to post some examples. And so that happens here.
Seneca also has a great netiquette resource we can add to help the students understand what's appropriate and maybe what would be inappropriate to post in those group chats as well. And when I say inappropriate, I don't mean literally inappropriate in the sense of a violation of a policy, but I'm just even referring to too much chatter, right? Or too much back and forth. And, you know, you saw when Jason shared his screen, I sent a Mariah Carey GIF. I mean, one, that's fine, but if you have 30, 40, 50 students in an MS Teams group, you can imagine how that will really dilute and distract from the actual task at hand.
And there was a comment that one faculty has a couple of students that have gone to or has heard about a couple of students going to the president to advocate against group projects, I guess, in this particular time.
Wow. Yeah. That the thing is, in my professional life, I've always worked in groups. Mm-hmm. So I can think of very, very few jobs where you don't.
Well, and I can imagine if a student's in a program where they're never going to be working in a group in their professional life and they don't see a connection there, then they might feel that it's not worth it, the extra stress. But if you're working in any sort of environment where you're going to be in teams, then I think that this experience, good or bad, you'll learn so much from it. So, yeah.
I'd probably also equate it to the expansion of a virtual global audience. I mean, I can't think of anybody that I work with professionally that isn't working remotely, in the sense of not just in our time zone, but in, you know, 3 other time zones around the world. And we have to figure out how to develop those tools. And that also, a keyword here is resilience, right? So it's a conflict, it's a challenge, but you can't just say, I don't want to do this anymore, right? It's sort of down to us as faculty, I think, to connect this to learning outcomes and connect this to their professional goals and dreams. So that way they're understanding why we're asking them to do this, that it isn't an arbitrary decision. And I know I've heard that assumption from some students over the years. Oh, it's easier for you, miss. You just want us to be in groups. So we need to be proactive about that rationale and that explain that why factor, which hopefully will motivate their engagement. Hopefully.
It looks like Tim shared something with us. He shared an Excel file with us. Is this for inputting names into Microsoft Teams, Tim?
Unmute myself.
There you go. We can hear you now.
Yes, it is. I download the class list out of Blackboard, paste it into that spreadsheet, or paste a couple of columns into that spreadsheet, and it will do some magic so that you can copy one cell and paste it into a group formation thing. And then when you're in Teams, you just say, I want group A, group B, group C, or my whole class. If, like Jason was saying, and my experience with Teams has mirrored Jason's. I absolutely love it. Easy for group management, so easy for group management.
And I know right now ITS is doing some testing on connecting our registration system with Microsoft Teams so that you'll be able to search by your course code and section number and be able to add a class all at once. That doesn't exist yet, but I know they're working on that connection. So
this little spreadsheet will make it very easy for you to do that, and the notes are in the spreadsheet.
Great, thank you so much for sharing. That's awesome. Can I add this to our site?
Oh yes, please.
Okay, thank you so much.
And just to Stella's point, I absolutely agree with you, Stella, that this is an important professional skill set that they're going to be not just having to apply, but that they're actually going to be requested to apply to demonstrate competence. That's a really excellent point.
Thank you.
So we are 5 minutes over. Sorry to go over. Type A, I hate when I go over, but thank you so much for joining us for the session. If you have any questions to follow up, you can always reach out to any of us.